Up to 1 million California public school students have signs of dyslexia. Hi, I'm Toby Meyer, State Director for Decoding Dyslexia California. Join us as we interview Mount Diablo Unified School District Selpa to understand what they're doing to help our dyslexic students. We are joined today with Dr. Wendi Aghily, Executive Director of Special Education at Mount Diablo Unified School District, and Dr. Kathy Futterman is adjunct faculty in the Department of Education, Psychology and Teacher Education at Cal State East Bay, and Education Specialist for Mount Diablo Diagnostic Team. Welcome, ladies. So let's begin by having you share your connection to dyslexia and what you did to learn more about this disability.
So we met about 2 years ago over a coffee, right as the Assembly bill was being passed regarding the implementation of the guidelines for working with students with dyslexia. And so we were in a place where the district needed to learn more about dyslexia and what the guidelines involved. And Kathy was in a different place in her career, so we met and we decided to collaborate to incorporate what we needed to do to serve our students.
Yeah, so I have a long time connection to dyslexia, with my brother being severely dyslexic, and he was not identified until he was 16 in California public schools, and I spent my career learning about language-based learning disabilities and dyslexia, and through the course of my education was working on my doctorate and wanted to look at how one particular public school was identifying students with dyslexia, given the legislation coming at the same time. And Wendi opened her door to me, and we just started collaborating from that very first coffee. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And you said that was in 2015?
Yeah, it was in August 2015 is when we started.
That's wonderful. Tell me a little bit about Mount Diablo Selpa and how many students are enrolled in special education and then in general education.
So Mount Diablo Selpa, we currently serve 4,000 students in our special education population out of a general education group of about 33,000 students. We touch many different municipalities, and we're a very diverse district with large variance in socioeconomic status, racial and ethnic diversity, and we're part of a large, welcoming community.
And Dr. Aghily, if you could explain your exact role within Selpa and the initiatives that you have done within this Selpa to raise dyslexia awareness.
Of course. So I am the Executive Director for Mount Diablo Selpa and School District. And what we looked at when we started the whole process were sort of a three-pronged approach, which were the identification and the assessment and then the intervention for students with reading disabilities, dyslexia. And then we also really tried to bring in all of the stakeholder groups identified, which was the general ed side of the house for teachers, as well as the special educators, including teachers, psychologists, speech therapists, and we also had to include parents in that whole process. And another key piece was our administrative team, getting them on board. But before we started with any of those things, the very first thing we did was raise awareness and actually helping people learn about dyslexia and what it is and how it impacts the students. So the first thing we did is we really bought an Experienced Dyslexia program in which there's 6 different stations, and the participants go through to learn about what a student with dyslexia goes through in a day in school in terms of reading and writing and listening. And I think that was our very first thing we started out with.
Yeah, and originally we presented to 60 special education teachers and some school psychologists at that Experienced Dyslexia simulation, right. But then Wendi went ahead and got 2 more kids, trained her special education administrators on it, so they've then since done the simulation with principals and general education teachers across the district.
You have a new official role that I touched on in the intro for you. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what your role is here at Mount Diablo.
Sure.
Selpa.
So Mount Diablo is unique in that in the special ed department, they have a diagnostic team, and the diagnostic team takes on particularly challenging cases that maybe either the school site either doesn't have the people to take care of it, or there's something about the particular case that's significantly challenging. So our diagnostic team is district-wide, and I'm the educational specialist for that. And the last year, I was working on not only assessing for dyslexia, but helping both special ed teachers and some school psychs understand how they could assess for dyslexia as well, because it's something very new to a lot of people, or their training didn't go very in depth on how to use the assessments that they may have been previously using, and or Wendi also purchased a tremendous amount of new assessment tools and how to use that to triangulate the data to determine a dyslexic profile. So that's what we started working on.
It sounds fantastic. And so as far as interventions are concerned, what kind of program or programs has this district selected for dyslexia intervention?
So let's go back a second to the assessment piece. It just so happened that the regulations and guidelines were coming out around assessments right around the same time that the publishers were all updating their test materials. So it was a fortuitous timing and a good opportunity for us to retrain everybody in using those, and the assessment tools were also designed to triangulate scores and really identify students with dyslexic profiles. So that was helpful for the training piece that we could roll that out. Regarding interventions, that was the next step in the process. And so what we did for that is we really looked for some multisensory reading programs that had all of the building blocks that students would need. In addition to just the multisensory part of it, we looked for something for our staff that was going to be ready for them to go. We're a large district, and we knew that if we just gave people things that required a lot of time and planning and all of those things, that it would be longer to get implemented, so we wanted to give them something ready to go. Some other factors we considered were availability of training and length of time it took to train people and then continue the training process. And in addition, finally, the actual length of the lessons. How did that fit into a student's day when we're also responsible for all of the other core content that our students have a right to learn, but still get their reading instruction that's going to enable them to progress.
And Dr. Futterman, I know that you were a stakeholder on the CDE program guidelines. How does the program the programs that Dr. Aghily has chosen for this district match up to the information that's in the guidelines?
Well, that's a great question. So in terms of what we've put forward in the California Department of Education's dyslexia guidelines, there's a whole section on structured literacy approaches. And the key components of a structured literacy approach is not only what you're teaching, but how you're teaching it. And so it needs to be multisensory, explicit, sequential, systematic, and direct instruction for reading and language. And the other components is what is being taught. So it's different than your typical general education English language arts curriculum. It is definitely a strand that can be added to any general education English language arts curriculum, and we highly recommend that in a differentiated instructional approach for those students who need it. But we started with special ed for both our resource centers, learning centers, and special day classes, and so they're using these two structured literacy approaches. And like I said, the components of what is being taught in the structured literacy approaches is not only phonology and phonemic awareness, but it also goes into semantics and syntax, morphology, vocabulary, reading comprehension, as well as some aspects of spelling and written expression. So it's a really deep cover of all the aspects or essential components of language. And you'll see in the guidelines that's kind of all laid out.
Perfect. So in regards to Mount Diablo and these programs, who and how are you training to deliver this instruction?
So we started out with a small group of teachers. We started out with our special education teachers at the elementary level, but many of our teachers at the elementary level for resource also work with our response to intervention program. And so those students also were getting the support from the same staff in a different way. So that was the first group we trained, and then we went ahead and trained our special day class teachers all the way up through high school. And then obviously I think the key here is the sustainability piece. It's not a one and done. We're not saying that we're experts in this by any stretch, but what we are saying is that we've started the journey, we've started training our staff, they're using the programs, and we continue to bring in additional trainings to support not only our new teachers, but also reinforce skills for our current teachers also.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight, Wendy's commitment to all these dyslexia initiatives, because we do know for any educational reform, in order for it to be sustainable, it needs to be 3 to 5 years of implementation, all the way up to possibly 7 years of implementation. So any district looking at their dyslexia initiative and their plan needs to be ready for, a multi-year process.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And how has the response been from all of the staff at Mount Diablo Unified School District?
We're a very large district. So I think that the staff has been positive, because I think that they like having a tool they can use, and so they like having a direction to go in. So I think that's been positive. I think we've had some teachers trying to work that out with their schedule and which groups of students can benefit, those types of things. But overall, I think the response has been overwhelmingly favorable.
Yeah, a lot of the special ed teachers are just very happy to have curriculum that is specifically designed to help these students, and that they're grateful for that.
Right, that's awesome. Yeah. So research has shown that early intervention is key. And what kind of plan is there in place to look for or to intervene at an early age that's for students that might be at risk for dyslexia? And I know that might be on the general ed side of the house, but is that a conversation that's happening?
We started out with our principals, and we trained our elementary principals last year, but again, that'll be part of an ongoing effort. And we trained them to look for the signs of a student who might be dyslexic. And the reason why we started out there is because capacity, our principals are the ones who are at the student study team meetings when the children are starting to struggle. So we felt that by giving them the knowledge, then they could make it accessible at every one of the school sites, especially at the elementary levels.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice, either one of you, for Selpa, other Selpas that may be watching this interview, for them to begin and implement a plan such as yours?
I think you have to look at all of the factors and make a plan for addressing all of your different stakeholder groups, and understand that it will take time, but you have to start somewhere. And for anybody who's just starting out on it, I think your first key is to start with the awareness piece. We bought in and we purchased the Experienced Dyslexia kits, and we have our staff of administrators in our special ed office, and we actually provide that experience. And once people go through that, I think it brings a different type of perspective to working with students with dyslexia. So I would recommend starting out with a broad awareness campaign of not only what dyslexia is in a textbook definition, but actually what it's like to be a student in a classroom. Mm-hmm. And then once you get that part and you get the buy-in, then you can move into the identification and assessment, and then ultimately intervention piece. Mm-hmm.
I think I completely agree with all that, and that was a very powerful experience to launch the initiatives by having different stations where teachers and school psychs and administrators could experience what it was like to try to struggle with reading, writing, and listening, and that's what the Experienced Dyslexia simulation is all about. Mm-hmm. And then The other piece is to really look at your district's RTI MTSS framework and what's in place for early identification, because it is going to come down to what's the general education teacher and teams are doing, and also working collaboratively with special education and realizing that we're all in this together, looking at the students and trying to identify them early.
Right. How do you think the community and parents can better support your Selpa in continuing this implementation plan?
I think by continuing to be advocates for their children. I think they have to know when things are going well and things are not going well. And when they're not going well, really being open to work with the team to figure out what that student needs. Maybe it is special education, maybe it's not, maybe it's accommodations, but really working collaboratively to come up with something that does work so the student can make progress.
Yeah, I think it's also important for parents and community members to realize that it's not going to be fixed, in 1 year or however long their time frame is. That a student with dyslexia always has dyslexia, and we do our absolute best to teach them and to remediate them and to provide accommodations and assistive technology, but that the way it looks over time, over their academic career, kind of changes, and the issues that they faced in kindergarten, first grade are going to be very different than some of the issues they're going to face in middle school and high school, even with excellent remediation, accommodations, and assistive technology. And just for parents in the community to understand that that this is something that the student deals with over their lifetime.
Well, ladies, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to sit with me today and answer our questions. And congratulations on your success here at Mount Diablo Unified School District.
Thank you.
Thank you.